Good evening, everyone, and hello and welcome to the beginning of Roger Federer week as we build up towards the last event of his career. Jamie, just quickly before we get into Federer at the Australian Open, how's the last few days been, do you think, in terms of tennis and Federer and the reflections?
Yeah, it's been really nice actually, just kind of, catching up and just sort of reliving some of his highlights. There's obviously been a lot of content to take in, probably not enough time to take everything in. A lot of podcasts, a lot of articles. But yeah, I'd say it's just been nice, and it's been nice kind of reading all of the players, ex-players, sort of paying homage to him.
Has it surprised you though when we see people like Messi, saying, what did he say? Something like he said something, and I know, Andres Iniesta and some Spanish football players have been reaching out and offering their messages of support, if you like, and I know Luka Modric as well, just like magician, very quickly in the aftermath, and of course we had fellow professionals, and I don't know, for me I know how big he is, but maybe I didn't quite realize. Maybe I underestimated how big he is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard a lot of people kind of even saying, is he the greatest sportsman of all time?
Right.
I mean, yeah, there's certainly an argument, and there's an argument, is he the greatest sportsman of all time, but not the greatest tennis player of all time?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Oh, well,
yeah.
anyway, so we're here to talk about his ups and downs because there were obviously many ups. He won the title 6 times in Australia, but there were a few downs, probably a bit more in latter years. The sort of first four, I think, came pretty quickly in the first half of his career, much like the rest of his career really reflected it, I guess. Let's start from the beginning. I'm going to ask you, do you know who he first ever played? Just say no, or you can have a guess if you want. Do you know who his first ever opponent was in Australia?
First ever opponent?
Hmm.
I don't know.
No, Michael Chang. Okay, so that's a nice
Ah,
little thing because, of course, there's
okay.
also sort of a overlap of the what do you call it, the generations. Of course, we went on to see him have that momentous victory at Wimbledon a couple of years later because he made his debut in 2000, the year 2000 at the Australian Open, and obviously a year later he's beating Sampras at Wimbledon. And we've seen, of course, how his success was at Wimbledon. It took a little bit longer to get to grips with Melbourne, perhaps, because I think Wimbledon, his first victory, of course, came in 2003. His first title in Australia was in 2004. I'm just going to actually
Hmm.
share the screen a little bit here so we can have a quick look at some of his highlights from Australia. Just give me a second while I bring up his basic stats, if you like. So he obviously starts there in the year 2000. His first round is against Michael Chang, and he wins in straight sets
Mm,
nicely.
wow.
He then wins his next match in straight sets too before he comes unstuck against, I think, a Frenchman called Arnaud Clomont. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah,
Oh, have
yeah.
you?
He
Okay.
used to, yeah, he used to wear, I think, no, he used to wear those kind of, I'm not sure whether he had glaucoma or not, but he used to wear glasses.
Oh, did he? Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
nice.
yeah.
So, well, somebody who Federer wouldn't have really liked in his sights because they played each other again a year later in the third round, and that he lost again. So he probably
Oh,
couldn't wait to see
wow.
the back of him. So he loses to him 2 years in a row, both at the same stage. So at this stage, when I'm
Wow.
just looking this up earlier, I decided, hang on a second, let me check out this Omon Cluno in terms of head to head against Federer, because maybe he's got the eagle sign or whatever
Grinning.
the expression is, the
Yeah.
Indian sign over him. No, not a bit of it. Federer goes on to win the head-to-head 8-3. So Clermont obviously wins these early ones in Australia. We can see here that actually Clermont wins, I think, 3 of the first 4, it looks like.
Yeah,
And
wow.
that's it. And that's it. So he wins 3 of the first 4, 2 of which are in Australia. And then Federer cleans up.
No surprise seeing Federer beat him in Halle as well, even if that was in 2000.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah, yeah, you can see that. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
that's Arnaud Clermont, and I may well be mispronouncing his name, but so just quickly, his first ever match in Australia, Michael Chang, it was on the 18th of January in the year 2000. He was 18, Federer was, so
Mm.
basically just a fraction younger than Alcaraz, of course, who's just won in the US a few days ago or last week. But yeah, 18-year-old, and he beats Michael Chang, which I think is a nice first ever match for him to have. He then went on to reach the third round, as I said, and even if his game was quite impressive, there was nobody really maybe thinking, or at least according to this article, that perhaps he was going to go on to great things. I know Chris Clary has said that, who's recently written a book about Federer, saying that he thinks he saw greatness in him pretty early on. But a lot of people, of course, suggesting his temperament was going to be his undoing. Have you heard those stories, Jamie?
Yeah, I have. I guess he did win. He won the Wimbledon boys title, didn't he?
Yep, he did.
So I
I think
guess
it was
maybe there.
98.
Okay. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people talking about the temperament and how that maybe that was almost kind of a barrier in the early days, because it seems like it was, by 2003 maybe he'd been able to calm that temperament a little bit.
So obviously he's went on to play 21 times in Melbourne. I think he pretty much didn't miss a year, which of course, in a way, really throughout his career, he barely missed any slams, which I think probably just made it even more, I don't know, more difficult, more astonishing, whatever, bearing in mind how the last 3 years have been, where I think he's only competed at Wimbledon in 2021. I think in the last 3 years, that's pretty much, or Australia 2020, that was it really. So those two, and I'll come on to those tournaments, shortly, because I think we had some comments this week about how actually his knee injury dates back to the summer of 2019. Because even in his retirement speech, I think he mentioned about how the last 3 years have been difficult. And I thought maybe he was just being a bit loose with that, bearing in mind it was kind of in the aftermath of the Australian Open in 2020 when things started to appear to go wrong for him, if you like. And I remember seeing him at the beginning of the pandemic hitting a ball against the wall, saying, I'm injured at the moment, but see you. And it was in the snow. He said, I'll see you on the grass, because I think he was going to go have an operation. That was obviously before the pandemic. And then actually we didn't see him for another 18 months, but that's much later in his career. Let's wind it back anyway to Australia. And I highlighted obviously his travails in his early part there. In 2002, he's getting bit better. And in 2002 and 2003, in 2002, he goes out to Tommy Haas in 5 sets, he'd go on and have a few epic matches against Tommy Haas, actually, interestingly. One at the French Open, and also one in Melbourne that I saw myself, but we'll come to that in a second, because that's a couple of years down the line. And then in 2003, he goes out to Nalbandian, also in 5 sets. But finally, he gets over the line, if you like, in 2004, beating Marat Safin in the final. I'm just going to show the match point from that particular match, and then we'll just have a quick chat about this juncture. This is the match point against Safin anyway. So this is his second Grand Slam, I believe, and his first one in Australia. We'd go on to see that celebration a few times. In fact, we'd seen it 6 months before at Wimbledon, and it's a bit more emotional at Wimbledon, wasn't he, when he won that title?
Yes, yeah, he was. Interesting to see the old colour of the Australian Open courts then as well.
Yeah, green. Yeah. That's still in Melbourne, of course, but because of course it wasn't always in Melbourne, and we've got the Open era as well. But obviously, pre-Open era would be like late 60s. But yeah, right, the green, and even the kits and the images and the sneakers. Funny enough, I remember seeing some from Rafa in his early years as well, and they're kind of like just sneakers you'd expect people to be wearing on the streets.
Yeah, exactly. I've got his route to the final actually in 2004 here as well.
Great, tell me about it.
So it was quite a difficult route actually. So I mean from the 4th round onwards, so he beat Hewitt in the 4th round in 4 sets.
Nice.
Of course, that would have been difficult. He got his revenge on Nalbandian in the quarterfinals. Then he had Ferrero in straight sets, of course. Now, so coach of Alcaraz. Yeah. Then he beat Safin in the final. So he had, what is that, sort of three other Grand Slam champions on his way to the final.
I mean, also Safin did he go to 5 sets at all? I don't think he did he, in this run?
No, he didn't. No, maximum 4.
He sort of was starting to really exert his authority. This, and I may be wrong, but this may have been the match that sealed his #1 status as well.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure on that, but I guess he would have, as you say, two Grand Slams in the back.
he certainly was about to embark on almost 5 years unbroken as world number one, which, bearing in mind the year
Wow.
we've just had, where it's changed hands about half a dozen times and currently resides with
Yeah.
Alcaraz, just goes
Yeah.
to show. I mean, 5 years from pretty much this moment, I would say, until the obviously Wimbledon 2008 was when he lost it, really. And this was the beginning of his absolute. He obviously won his first major the year before Wimbledon, but this was the beginning of Federer just turning up everywhere except Roland Garros, and either being a threat, a finalist, a semi-finalist, or just wiping the floor with his opponents,
Yeah.
as he did this particular year, obviously in not even being pushed to 5 sets.
Yeah.
We sometimes see it Roland Garros, and we do see it at Wimbledon as well. Champions not dropping a set. On a hard court, though, that is very rare. So the next best thing, obviously, never being pushed to 5, I think is almost as admirable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, this set off a period where, until 2008, he was almost kind of, a lot of times he was winning Grand Slams, kind of not even really needing to be at his best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because,
Which, yeah, I'm not sure if you've ever sort of seen that really, over that
no.
long a period.
Agree. We never, I mean, whether it be Rafa or Novak, because their peaks obviously came a little bit later. Rafa being 3 or 4 years younger than Roger. Of course, Novak is 4 or 5 years younger, so obviously those two are quite close. But Novak didn't really hit top gear until probably about 2010, I would say. I know he won his first major in Australia at 2008, and we're going to come to Novak a lot because, of course, he would end up being a bit of a thorn in the Federer side in the second half of his period in Australia. I mean, he competed in Australia for 20 years, and the first half goes to about 2010, and the second half goes from 2010 to 2020, and it's that second half where he's kind of stuck on about 16 majors for quite a while. Or it might be 17, 18, but that sort of period. And we're going to come to that shortly, of course. But yeah, he really was a dominant figure. Didn't win it in 05. In 05, he went out in the semis. I'm not quite sure he went out to in those semi-finals in 05. Have you got that on your screen?
Yes, I've got it. He lost to Safin. So Safin got
Oh,
his
he
own
lost to
back.
Safin. So who beat the year before? Okay, so
Yeah, 9-7 in the fifth.
9-7 in the fifth. Well, that
Yeah.
figure will come back to haunt him as well, because that's exactly what he lost to Rafa at Wimbledon in 2008.
Yeah.
Get your thoughts in the live chat, by the way. Let me know if you've ever seen Roger Federer in Australia. I have, and I'm going to come to that very, very shortly, because we're about to come up to the year where I was there. Have you ever seen Roger Federer compete in Australia? Or even if you haven't, just some of your favorite memories of him competing down under. That would be great to hear those thoughts in the live chat. I will be coming back to the live chat shortly, but for now, I want to get to 2006, because we're still very much in this purple period. I was fortunate enough to see him in this run, and he seemed pretty imperious. I went to see him play Tommy Haas again, and they would have a few epic matches. I've already mentioned one that they had in Melbourne early in the 2000s. Well, they met again in 2006. They would go on to meet each other in 2009 at the French Open in what would be an epic match. But we'll address that perhaps another day. We're going to do the French Open tomorrow, and also some of the epic matches in Federer's career I'm going to be addressing later on this week with Owen. So anyway, but before we do that, so Tommy Haas, and he goes up 2-0. And you know what happens, don't you? Because I've told you this story many times, Jamie.
Yeah, and then he goes 2-0 and then Tommy Haas fights back, doesn't he?
While I'm asleep.
Whilst you're asleep.
Yeah,
So
because I'd been to the daytime, and I'd seen, I think Davydenko was playing and a few others. It was just a fairly not great lineup in the daytime, let's say. And of course, they left the best matches for the evening. And the evening was Martina Hingis, Sammy Stosur. Hingis, of course, her light was still burning brightly, I would suggest, at least from memory. And Sammy Stosur was this newbie. And I think she may even have shocked someone early on in that tournament. And so that was a good match to see. Of course, Sammy Stosur being a home favourite, who went on to win a major of her own. I think she might have won the Australian Open once.
She did.
She won one slam. Was it Australia
US
or US?
Open? US Open, I think she won.
The US Open. So anyway, and of course, she had great success in doubles as well. But also that same evening was Federer, Tommy Haas. And it's like, oh, why did I go for the day session? And anyway, me and my friend, we queued up and we got tickets for the night session in the end as well. But it had been a very long day, put it that way. I mean, I remember that. And then obviously The hours caught up with me, and so did the red wine as I had a little snooze. And during that snooze, Federer seemed to fall asleep as well, because from being 2-0 up, and this was just something Federer didn't really do in those days. Go 2-0 up and then cruise and actually let his opponent back in. Normally when Federer had you by the throat, he didn't let go. But he did seem to let go that day. I mean, I can't really remember how Haas... I do remember the crowd being really keen for a Haas comeback. Listen, Federer was immensely popular in Australia, and I've just watched some more recent matches of his, and you can see how loved he is, particularly in the second half of his career. But of course, they also want to see more tennis, and I think maybe there are some few Germans in the crowd. So I do remember some Tommy Haas support. It goes to the fifth set. Federer gets back on the bike and wins. And to be honest with you, he gets back on the bike and goes on to win the tournament. Do you remember who he beat in the final that year? I mean, I know. Do you remember?
In which year is this now?
2006 still.
2006. I don't know. Andy Roddick? Baghdatis. Okay.
And this was his best chance for winning a major and his breakthrough year. I think he may have upset somebody early on in the tournament as well. I don't remember who he beat, but it was like, oh, maybe this guy's quite good. And that was his breakthrough tournament, if you like. Obviously, he's going to have a pretty good career, but he never really was a threat at the slams again. And then he comes across Federer in the final. And I've got an interesting tale to tell you about this final. It's an interview that Baghdatis gave to the Tennis Podcast about 2 years ago. And it's talking about the final. And I think Baghdatis wins the first set. Can you get the stats up for me just while I go through this story? Baghdatis wins the first set, and I think he's on the verge of perhaps winning the second set. And for the first time, he thinks, I might win the Australian Open. I might beat Roger Federer. And that's when the wheels come off. And he says that. He says, I think he may have got a break in the second set. Did the second set go like 7-5 or 7-6?
The second set was 7-5.
7-5, was it? Yeah, to Federer, right?
Yeah.
So obviously Baghdatis wins the first set, and I think it's really nip and tuck, as you can tell from that second set. And he may even have got a break, like at 5-3 or 5-4 or something like that. And he's serving, I think, and he's certainly very close to winning that second set. And maybe he's got a break point or something. But anyway, he thinks, I might do this. And that's the moment that he loses the concentration. And that's the moment he loses the match, that he says in his recollection. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Federer had a lot to do with it too. But maybe that just gives you an example, partly of the aura that Federer had started to build up by now. Do you remember anything about Marcus Baghdatis, by the way? Don't worry if you don't.
I remember that. I remember that match vaguely. I think I also remember Marcus. He was just always kind of a very, very entertaining player to watch, wasn't he? Very kind of... a lot of exuberance, really exciting. But yeah, you can kind of really hear in what you're saying about Baghdatis and his experience in that final, and then looking at the scoreline, you can really sort of see what happened. I mean, do you know how many games he won after that second set?
3.
2.
There you go. So what was the score in the end? The overall score?
It was 5-7, 5, 6-love, 6-2.
6-love, 6-2. So it was, what was it? Can you repeat that? Because we didn't hear you say the first few words.
Oh, sorry. 5-7, 7-5, 6-love, 6-2.
Yeah, the wheels really did come off. And yeah, he lets his heart out, and it's quite sad, actually, bearing in mind that Federer would go on to win, as I say, 6 Australian Opens in title. Maybe it could have been one for Baghdatis somewhere along the line. But anyway, look at this period, though, of dominance in Australia in particular, where he's a winner, semi-finalist, winner, semi-finalist, finalist and winner up until 2010 at least, anyway. And we're racing. We're gonna have to race through these years because we've only got sort of half an hour in total to do this show, and we're still sort of at the beginning of his era there. In 2007, he also wins, beating Fernando Gonzalez, a Chilean, in straight sets. I have almost no memory of that match, or even Gonzalez as a player. Do you know anything about him?
Okay, Gonzalez, he was a very kind of a big forehand. He also got to the final of the Olympics as well, and lost to Nadal in 2008.
Oh, in the same year?
Yeah.
Because that was 2008, I think, or maybe no, sorry, so about a year or two later. Yeah, so 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a year or two later, so he's a silver medalist as well in singles.
Just like Federer, of course, because Federer never
won gold. Just like Federer. Yeah.
Olympics. Of course, he did. You didn't go to the Olympics in 2012, did you?
No, I didn't go.
He played Murray in that final and blah blah blah. But listen, that's another day. Yeah. So 2007, he's a champion. 2008, though, he would come up against a familiar foe, or what was to become a familiar foe. And even, especially at this stage of the tournament, funny enough, Novak Djokovic, in the first time that they would meet in Australia, and I think they met 5 times in all. And poor old Federer came off quite badly in these meetings. He lost 4 of the 5 meetings I think they had in Australia. I'm just going to check their head-to-head, actually, Novak Federer head-to-head. I know it's 27-23 overall, and I think they played each other 5 times in Australia. And like I say, Federer won just 1 of those 5. Let me just go quickly through the stats here regarding Federer and Australia. Yeah, so they won in 2007. They met for the first time, and that was en route to obviously winning the title. And Federer won that in straight sets. But the next 4 times they would meet, Novak always had the upper hand. And he had the upper hand that day in the semi-finals in 2008. And Djokovic, of course, would go on to win the title that year. He beat Murray, didn't he, in the final? No, he beat Tsonga, sorry.
Tsonga, that's it.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier, didn't we? 2009. I think we should sort of breathe a little bit here because, of course, he gets to the final again. But this time, and for the first time in his career, he would actually lose the final. I'm not sure if it's the only time he lost a final, actually, in Australia. May well be. I think it is. So he reached the final 7 times, and he won it 6. That's pretty good.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So he loses, and the only time he loses is in an absolute epic 2009 against Rafael Nadal. I remember some things about this, but first of all, tell me what you remember or what you're aware of regarding this final.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you kind of asked, if you were asked to sort of think of your favourite Federer Nadal memories, I think this obviously the 2008 Wimbledon final. You've got the 2 Australian Open finals, I think, and you've got this one, which kind of it was maybe how long would it have been? It would have been 5 or 6 months after that 2008 final, and it really kind of followed that kind of followed the pattern almost of sort of what happened at Wimbledon. I mean, I was watching some of the highlights back today, and even the match point, Federer was on top in the rally. He should have won. He should have won the point, but Nadal's defense was just so amazing. He kept getting the ball back, and he just broke Federer's resistance down, sort of time and time again around that period.
Yeah, he did, and really, I mean, I remember the end of the match. Federer crying, and this was crying in defeat. So it's, we see lots of players outpouring of emotion in victory, and that's understandable. But there was something a bit crushing about this defeat because obviously we had the whole French Open thing, and we always knew how Nadal would, win 9 times out of 10 on clay, or 9 times actually he won 100% in Paris, but probably in clay, probably it's more like 8 times out of 10 as a whole in their career. But you knew Philippe Chatrier, it was going to be a tall order for Federer to ever overcome. But he always had Wimbledon. And if he didn't have Wimbledon, he always had the hard courts elsewhere. But even that, Nadal was chipping away at. And of course, finally skittled him over at Wimbledon. And then he skittled him over again, albeit in 5 sets. And I think you're right, it's the defense. I'm just going to show this point because this point was insane. Can you see the screen, by the way, right now, Jamie?
Yeah.
Okay, let's watch this point.
Oh. Oh. It's insane, isn't it?
Insane defense, and I urge people to watch this over and over again. I mean, there's so many points in the rally that I think that Nadal has done, and also Federer at times. And also there's the left-handed bit to the end of that rally in a way that just sort of adds to the whole thing in a way. There was the attacking of the backhand that Nadal would like to do during this period. He sort of found a chink in the armor, but Federer's also talked about how Nadal's left-handedness bugged him immensely. And none more so than at the end of this rally, the culmination of it is the fact that Nadal is a left-hander, and it's just there for him, if you like, and he puts it away with aplomb as only Rafa can. So that's 2009, and before we move on from this, it was just a narrative that was beginning to build regarding now, he had a rival, and Federer's talked about how he didn't like that rivalry at first. He didn't embrace it. It took him a while. And there was a sense of, maybe this person who's the greatest player of all time isn't all he's cracked up to be, because how can you be the greatest player of all time but actually have a losing record against your biggest rival? And that would, of course, endure, and it would also occur with Djokovic too. But listen, he
Yeah.
bounced back. And he won in
Good.
2010. He beat Murray in straight sets in the final. In
Yeah.
2010, 13-11 in the tiebreak. That was the most epic moment of the match, of course. Do you remember anything about this, or even just the rivalry with Murray in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think this would have been Murray's because he also beat Murray in the final in '08 at the US Open,
Yeah.
which would have been Murray's first final, and then second Slam final he was playing Federer again. So yeah, it was. I remember Federer had sort of said some quite disparaging remarks about Murray actually quite early on in his career, saying he's too defensive, he needs to change his style of play. And
Okay.
then Murray actually had a winning record against him early on in his career.
Okay.
Murray would usually get the better of Federer, certainly outside the slams, but then obviously in the slams when it mattered, Federer seemed to come out on top. I don't
Yeah,
remember
because
that much about that final in particular.
of course Murray would go on to sort of lose his first three slams, as we mentioned. I think it was Federer
First
twice
four,
and first four, was it Federer twice and
yeah.
Djokovic twice? Was it then?
Federer twice. I think Federer three times because he also lost. He also lost to Federer in 2012.
Yeah.
Federer won the first set, and they closed. Murray
Yeah,
won the first
Wimbledon.
set.
Yeah,
Sorry, they
yeah,
closed the roof at Wimbledon.
yeah. Of course,
Yeah,
he would go on
exactly.
a few weeks later to win the gold medal. But anyway,
Yeah.
2011 was Novak again at the semi-final stage, and again we're starting to see this pattern emerge against Novak, where obviously Roger had won really early on in their head-to-head battles at the Australian Open, but now we're in Novak territory, and that occurs in 2011. 2012, by the way, again, more chinks coming away at the armory, so to speak. It's another semi-final defeat. It's another defeat against Rafa. It seems to be every time that him and Rafa played each other in all the big matches, at least from this period, say from 2008 to even 2017, I would suggest there was a feeling that whenever they would meet, of course, if they ever met in Paris, it was going to go one way. And if they met at elsewhere, certainly in Australia
Mm,
anyway, it was getting. And the thing was, Rafa is it got worse for Roger in terms of 2009 was a tight five setter, as we've just highlighted. 2012, four sets. 2014, they would meet again at the semi-final stage, straight sets this time. And the gap is
mm.
widening between those two. Sandwiched in between was 2013, and he lost to Andy Murray in 2013 in five sets, it would seem. Do you remember anything from that match?
Again, vaguely, but I think that was kind of, as you say, there wasn't that kind of. He'd completely lost that sort of veneer of invincibility, hadn't he? By that point, um,
Yeah. I'm just going to
and
just bring up a few of the live chat
yeah,
comments. There's been quite a few, and I have been ignoring them. Sorry for this.
sure.
So yeah, he says about so this is Ghost here suggesting that Tsonga should really have won the 2008 Australian Open. That was obviously against Djokovic. I don't really
Djokovic.
remember much of that fun. Did it go five sets then?
Not sure. I don't
By the way,
know.
Ghost here is saying he saw Federer at the '08 Australian. It was in the first week though, and he couldn't afford to go to the match against Djokovic. Ghost, what were your impressions of him in that tournament? You obviously saw him. I don't know if you can just pop up in the live chat and say which match it was you saw him in 2008. Nice there, Jane, to have you on board, and also, of course, you, Ghosty, as well. I like this name as well, Ghosty. Maybe I'll be calling you Ghosty from now on. So anyway, there we go. Thanks
By
for
the
your
way, I
comment,
like
Mike.
Jane's US Open cap as well. It's cool.
Oh, right. She's got a US Open cat.
Yeah.
So she has. Yeah. So yeah, just let us know in the live chat any other final thoughts. What we've got here. Do we know the winning percentage in the Grand Slam? I've actually put up a few interesting stats on Twitter today, Ghosty. I know you don't have Twitter, but I'll try and share those with you at some point. What was the name of the website that you were suggesting, Jamie? It's really good for stats earlier.
Yeah, I've been using it, tennisexplorer.com.
Tennisexplorer.com.
You just type in the sort of the player and the tournament, and then you get a whole history of kind of where they got to in that year and who they played.
Yeah, and I had a nice little interaction with Mark Pecci earlier, and he said he uses one called, what did he use? Oh, at Tennis Abstract. So that's another one for you, perhaps, to get some nice stats and data. I was basically just highlighting on Twitter earlier just how really often particularly the last 10 years, basically whenever the big three met each other, whoever won the first set went on to win. I think I looked at about the last 15 matches amongst the 3 players or so at slams anyway, where of course it's easier to turn around a 1-set deficit. I wanted to focus on the slams, bearing in mind that, 1-set deficit over 3 sets is harder to turn around. And it's like 14 out of 15, whoever wins the first set. And the one that bucks the trend is Rafa won the first set in the semi-final in Roland Garros last year. And obviously Novak goes on to win that. Keep your thoughts coming in the live chat. Ghost, tell me who. Oh, it was round 1, an Argentinian. Can't remember his name. Federer dominated. All right, that'll do, Ghosty. So cool. Let's get back to this. We need to race through some of these years. I know Jamie's off on holiday tomorrow. So yeah, 2013 was Murray in 5 sets. 2014 as well was another element to the Rafa story that was just getting worse and worse for Roger.
Just quickly on that, John, what do you think? So, what do you think was kind of the difference there? Why do you think he was kind of getting further and further away from Rafa?
I'm glad you asked. We're actually going to do. I will give you an answer, but first of all, I'm just going to say we're going to do a show, I think, on Friday, looking at some of the rivalry between the 2 players and how it evolved, changed, and ultimately Federer managed to sort of turn it around. I mean, I know he's got a losing record, but focusing on the slams, it was just getting worse and worse for Roger, to the point of, this is getting, I mean, it's not quite Richard Gasquet levels, but it was getting quite embarrassing for Roger, particularly, as I say, he was obviously tearful in 2009 and he was losing the narrow ones, but in the end, he was obviously losing more and more comfortably on a hard court. They never met in the US, but yeah, so why, and we're going to do a bit on that and also about how Federer turned it around later on in his career. Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, this is not rocket science. I'm not a tactical analyst. I leave that to others, but there's a couple of things. First of all, I do think there was a psychological element to it. Roger said how badly he felt in 2008 at Roland Garros with winning just 4 games over the 3 sets. I think it was 6-3, 6-1, 6-love, something like that. It was certainly 4 games anyway that he won. And he said he took that feeling into the first 2 sets at Wimbledon in 2008. Now, I know you were at the 07 and the 08 finals. You weren't at 06, were you?
No.
Right. No. So, but you would have seen yourself how Rafa was gnawing away at the advantage. I mean, each year it was getting closer and closer on grass. And so there was a psychological element. And I listen, we all admire Federer for being, an unbelievable titan of the sport and arguably one of the strongest mentally. But that doesn't mean you're infallible. And I saw it as well with Djokovic. I was watching the 2016 semi-final with Djokovic today, and I'll come to that in a second. And I did see some mental frailty that I've heard it argued that Roger was so good that actually nerves didn't really matter. So he could be just as, say him and Bagdatis are equally nervous, okay? Well, he wins because he's better, and he's much better. And he's much better than Philippoussis, and he's much better than Hewitt when he played Hewitt, if you like, at this stage. He didn't really have anyone phenomenally good. Maybe Roddick on grass could challenge him a bit, but ultimately, he was so much better than everyone on all the surfaces except clay that it didn't really matter until 2008, 2009, 2010. And this is when Rafa comes along. He said he didn't embrace the rivalry. The second thing is, and again, this is the sort of tactical side of it, I think he said how he found it difficult against a lefty. He always talks about this. He talks about Federer, about Rafa being a lefty more than any other player. No other player mentions it as often as he does. In fact, he's even gone on record. I forget where and when, but he's talking. Him and Rafa are chatting. Oh, it was when they had their Instagram live thing last year when Rafa couldn't work it out. I don't know if you've seen that. And he talked about, he said, why did you become a lefty? How did that happen? Because there's a few legendary stories about how Uncle Tony wanted him to become a lefty. And actually, it's not true. Rafa was a double-handed forehand player and a double-handed backhand player. And basically, Uncle Tony said, look, nobody ever really plays like this. So... you need to sort this out one way or another. But there was no instruction from Uncle Tony about, listen, be a lefty, because I think one day it might come to fruition. I think it was just Rafa just said it just happened, really, or happened naturally. But he does talk about it a lot. And the other thing is, and the final thing is, the backhand, the one-handed backhand, if you could pepper it often enough, and very few players could pin him to that corner of the court. But Rafa managed to. He could do it on clay, obviously, fairly easily, but he managed to do it as well on grass, which obviously takes a lot of some doing. But he could really just keep peppering. No other player could pepper the backhand as often if you know what I mean.
No.
The defense that you mentioned before would sometimes put him in that position too. But yeah, I think psychologically was probably the biggest reason amongst all of them, and he turned it
Yeah.
around. And we'll come to that in a minute. Have you got any thoughts on how that rivalry sort of happened like that?
Yeah, yeah, I think I do tend to agree with you in terms of the way that it went in terms of it kind of as you say it really kind of you really see it here in the Australian Open. It went their meetings. It went from even though the
Five,
outcome was
four,
always the
three.
same, the day I won, it went from 5 to 4 to 3. So
Yeah.
it almost seemed as though he was just kind of losing belief every single time he played him.
Same at
Um,
Wimbledon in a very different way, with obviously being, I think, 4 sets in '07 defeat or 5 sets defeat in, sorry, in '06,
that
'06. I think he loses in 4 sets in '06, he loses in five
right,
sets in '07, and he wins in
yeah.
5 sets in '08. So very similar progression, albeit from a deficit, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. And it must kind of be such a psychological blow, mustn't it, to kind of lose in the manner that Federer lost to Nadal in '08 and in '09. We've spoken about Federer not needing to be at his best and winning, and you
Yeah.
could certainly say that in '08 and in '09 against Nadal, he was at his best, but unfortunately for him, he lost.
We now enter a period really for Roger of basically major wilderness, if you like, because of course it's from around about, I don't know when his last major was, maybe 2013, something like that. I'm thinking he didn't win the US Open after 2009. He won 5 back to back, and then he didn't win it again for the rest of his career.
Mm.
He obviously won Roland Garros in 2009. He won Wimbledon 2010. That would have been his 15th. I think he got his
He,
16th,
he,
maybe.
he won Wimbledon
Maybe
2012, didn't he? Might have been that one.
Wimbledon 2012. So Wimbledon 2012, exactly. He then goes 4.5 years without a slam. But there is a difference in that I remember Rafa going through a period, Novak as well, both of which were about 2 years each. The difference between Rafa and Novak, though, is that theirs was 2 years, Rogers was 4.5. So it was like double the length of time, if you like. The weird thing is, though, that Rafa and Novak were nowhere for those 2 years. They weren't getting to finals and losing narrowly, or semi-finals and losing narrowly. They
Mm.
were just getting to, Rafa was going out in second rounds at Wimbledon to Dustin Brown and this kind of thing. And
Yeah,
even Roland Garros, he got beaten up quite badly at the quarterfinal stage against Novak in
and losing
2015.
to Fognini 2 sets up.
Yeah, exactly, in the US. So he was just not making any impression. Roger was still knocking at the door during this 4.5 year period. So it might have been a lot longer, but he was still
Mm.
there or thereabouts.
That's true.
I think he lost 1 or 2 Wimbledon finals to Novak, for example. And he obviously got a string of semi-finals here. We're looking at from 2011 to 2016. He's
Mm.
in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 6 years. He makes the semi-final stage. The one difference was 2015 when he goes out in the third round to Seppi, which I just can't believe. But anyway, that happened. 2016, though, semi-final. I want to elaborate a bit on this. I know we're running out of time because I know you've got to get going, but hopefully you'll indulge me. I just watched that match today pretty much from start to finish against Novak, and I just made a few notes on it because this is actually like 4 years now since he'd won a major, if you like, almost 4 years. And he was broken. He was broken. I don't mean in terms of the serve. I mean mentally.
Yeah.
The first 2 sets, okay. First of all, he doesn't serve first, okay. And I thought that's a strange thing to do. And they mentioned it in the commentary later on, of course, how the match panned out. Also, by the way, in the build-up to the match, they were saying arguably the greatest player of all time in reference to Roger Federer, because this is still, Novak is still 10 slams behind, if you like, in the race or something like that, or a bit less, maybe 7 or 8. So it's obviously they're talking about Federer, and they said, but we whisper it round here because of Rod Laver, because obviously Rod Laver's Australian. They were in the Melbourne Arena, of course, or the Rod Laver Arena, and I was thinking, we whisper it now, but not because of Rod Laver. We whisper it now because you might have a Novak or a Rafa fan nearby, and yet really in 2016, despite this barren period, it was still seen as he's clearly the best of all time. Despite this head-to-head with Rafa, he was still seen clearly as the head-to-head. And then this day arrives, and it's been quite a while now, because obviously I mentioned how there'd been sort of 3 or 4 wins in a row for Novak in Australia, and that continued that day. And let me tell you this: the first, I've got it here. It was around about, I think it was 6-1 the first set, and it was 5-1 in the second set in 45 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, 6-1, 5-1. I mean, that's kind of Richard Gasquet against Rafa Nadal kind of levels, if you like. And I know it's the second time I mentioned it on this pod. Of course, there's also Novak against Monfils levels as well in terms of their 18-0 head-to-head as well. But I mean, and the other thing, final thing was that Novak was playing excellently as only he can. But also, Roger was making some weird decisions, coming to the net tentatively. I saw some first serves that were going 3 meters out. I saw some challenges that were just narrowly going against him, and it was crushing. He did really well, gets back into it, and I'm just going to show this point that was just insane from that, which is one of the really good moments. Federer ends up winning the point. He goes on to lose the match, but just watch this point. I know you obviously couldn't quite see that because you obviously went off to get your charger, Jamie. But I'll come to the live chat to see what some people have been saying about the Australian Open and about Roger Federer. Let's have a look. Poor old Gasquet, yeah, he's getting mentioned quite a lot. Let's just have a quick look at this. If you watch post-match pressures. Okay, this is about the Federer and Nadal thing here. James obviously bringing up an interesting point. If you watch post-match pressures in Fed's early defeats to Nadal, he would talk more about how he had not played as well. Yeah, but that's quite common, Jane, rather than saying Nadal was exceptional. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough, let's say. And I think when you're that good and then it's that shocking that generally as tennis players, when we lose, we like to say how the other guys played well, but we also like to say that we played badly in a way. And I don't begrudge him too much for that. And I know him and obviously Rafa get on really, really well. So that was an excellent point, and he did rally in the third set and he brings it back to 2-1, but Novak goes on to win in 4 sets. And that was kind of the tail of the tape, if you like, for him in Australia during this period of time. But then what happens next? What happens in 2017, Jamie? I'm just going to split the screen here and tell me what you remember about that year.
Yeah, so in 2017, so he'd been out for about 6 months, hadn't he, Federer? He hadn't played.
Hadn't won a slam for 5 years almost.
Hadn't won a slam for 5 years, hadn't played for 6 months.
Yep.
So, it was almost kind of, everyone was happy. Everyone was really happy to see Federer back. I think anything would have been a bonus. Getting to the second week would have been okay. He's done really, really well. And particularly if you look at I don't know if you remember them, particularly if you look at the draw that he had as well. I mean, his route to the final.
Seed, don't forget, he's 17 seed.
17th seed. Okay, yeah. So his route to the final is just insane. I mean, Meltzer he beat first round, Rubin second round. Okay, but then after that you've got Thomas Berdych in the third round, and he was a force back then 5 years ago.
Very much so, yeah.
Nishikori in 5 sets in the fourth round. Zverev he beats in straight sets in the quarterfinals.
Wait, are you sure? I thought Rafa played Zverev that year.
2017, Federer Zverev here.
I thought Rafa played Zverev in 2017. I'm pretty sure he did. Maybe I've got it wrong, but I'm pretty sure Rafa Zverev 2017 Australian Open.
Tennis Explorer, John.
Yeah, he did. Rafa played Zverev. So I don't know who Roger played in the quarters that year, but
Oh, 2017. Are you sure?
Yeah. Roger Federer. Let me see. Quarterfinals. Australian Open 2017. He played Wawrinka in the Misha Zverev. There we go.
Oh, Misha Zverev. Okay, yeah. Of course. Okay, yeah.
Jamie, just so you know, when you move your head away like that, we can't really hear you very well. So it's great that you got those stats, but when you move forward, I can't. I hear you perfectly when you stood there. But it's just
perfect.
But yeah, so I mean, you're right. It was an incredible run, but of course he was ranked seed 17, which is why. But you're right. Berdych is obviously he would one of the best players not to win a slam, certainly in the last 2 decades, I would suggest.
Absolutely.
Nishikori was a slam finalist too. Wawrinka would win 3 slams, I think, in his career, and of course, Rafa in the final. Because Wawrinka was 5. Oh, by the way, how many 5? So he had a 5-setter against Nishikori.
Yeah.
He had a 5-setter against Wawrinka where he won the first 2 sets and lost the next 2. Boy, that must have been a tough one for him to maintain. And then, of course, He has 5 sets in the final. And who was the final against? Rafael Nadal, who'd also had this barren period, if you like, for about 2 years, I think, without winning a slam, maybe 2.5 years. I think it was 2014 French Open was his last one. And he was just shorn of confidence for 2.5 years. He actually didn't have that. He had some injuries, but it wasn't like other years when we've seen Rafa. Actually, those 2.5 years, he was fairly fit. So it was even more baffling that Rafa couldn't really work things out. But now they're in that final. My memory of before the match, I remember I was running a half marathon that day and I missed the first couple of sets. But I was so sure that Rafa would win because of the fact that Rafa always beat Federer at slams pretty much, certainly for the previous 9 years. I think it probably was 9 years when they met slams. Rafa would always win because he won 08 Wimbledon, and then he won always at Roland Garros, and he won 3 or 4 times in Australia. So in the last 5 or 6 matches, and Federer could barely lay a glove on him in the end. So I was quite confident. I was shocked that during this half marathon, I was giving it a normal amount. I wasn't really going to get my PB or anything like that. So I did race into a bar during the half marathon in Seville. So I was in southern Spain, and I just nipped into because I knew a cafe or a bar would be showing that night. And I was about halfway through the half marathon, so I was about 10 kilometers in. And I thought I'll just dive in and quickly see how the first set's going. And because I think I may have had I don't even know if I had a smartphone back then. I'm not sure. But anyway, I dived into the bar. No, I would have had a smartphone, but maybe I didn't have internet or something. But I dived in. I just thought it was fun as well. And he'd lost the first set, and I was like, what? That's not going to plan. And yeah. And so yeah, it's fine. But I thought that's not going to plan. But obviously, he then goes on to win the next set, I think, Rafa. So it's then 1 set all, and then you just think everything's fine again. And then I watched sets 3, 4, and 5. And I was surprised that Federer, having lost the second set, got it back again, 6-1. Nadal obviously wins the 4th set. And then there's the 5th set. Can you remember what happens in the 5th set?
Yeah, I remember. I remember it being quite. It was quite a slow burner, I think, the final, and it really came to life in that 5th set. So Nadal goes a break up, and then watched a bit today. I think there's a big juice game, and Federer sort of gets the break back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just kind of it was so dramatic, and kind of I think it was such a build match. It was so hyped, and it really kind of lived up to the hype in that 5th set.
It did, because it was hyped. I remember Pat Cash on the commentary before the match. I've seen this since. He's so pumped. Australia's getting pumped because we never thought we would see these two players play again in a major, partly because, both of them, well, pretty primarily because both of them had been off form for 2, 3, 4 years, as I'd mentioned. And they produced a classic. It went to 5 sets. Nadal does what he does, has done a couple of times before. He's done it twice now in his career in Melbourne, where he goes a break up in the 5th, but doesn't manage to go on to win the match. Obviously, Novak in 2012 being the other occasion. And then Federer breaks back, and now it's 3-4 with Rafa serving. And this is the game. It's not the break point, but this is the game where Federer basically breaks his serve. So in many respects, this is the point that really matters maybe most in the entire match. Just have a quick watch this. By the way, don't worry, Jamie. I will finish at exactly 10 o'clock because I've actually got another show to do at 10 o'clock. So don't worry about that. But interestingly, I think what's really interesting about that rally, if you like, is how it kind of is the mirror image of the rally from like the one I showed from 5 years before, or what is it, 8 years before? Sorry. It's almost the mirror image. It finishes with a righty going into the open, or not the open space, but the down the line space, just as it had done the year before. And it was also Roger winning the point, not Rafa. It was also at the end of a lengthy rally where both have been unbelievable. And it was kind of like interesting. It was also whilst Rafa was serving, the time before was when Roger was serving, and similar points in the match. And
Yeah.
Roger, of course, goes on to win his first slam in 4.5 years, his 18th, I think, in total at that point, and his his fifth Australian Open. He would be back again a year later to win his 20th and final slam. Jamie, you were in Australia. You were actually at the quarterfinal between Cilic and Nadal, and of course Nadal pulls out injured, possibly aiding and abetting Federer's chances, if you like, because of course Federer would go on to play Cilic in the final, right? And you watched that on a big screen, right?
Yeah, I watched that on a big screen in Melbourne actually, and yeah, of course that would end up being Federer's 20th slam and end up being his last slam as well, wouldn't it? And I just remember I can't quite remember how many would have been ahead of Rafa at that point, but I did remember thinking him, when he got to 20, he's kind of reasserted that, kind of presumption, I guess, that he is the greatest of all time. I can't see anybody else getting to 20. That was how I was thinking that was what I was thinking at that point. And it also seemed plausible that he could add to that. He could add to that total at that point as well, because he'd almost won that
Yeah.
Australian Open a bit of a canter as well.
Yeah,
Apart
right.
from in
I
the
can tell you what
final.
the gap was. It was 2016, which, as you say, that gives you enough of a
Okay.
buffer zone. Bearing in mind, you probably think at that point he's going to win another one, maybe another Wimbledon. And of course, he came very, very close to winning in 2019. But that was to be his final Australian Open victory. It was a fairly comfortable one in a way. It probably was sort of more of a reminder of the early years of him in Australia. But 6 Australian Opens, not bad, hey? I mean, obviously we've got Novak with 73, but with Novak aside, that's a pretty good haul. I mean, bearing in mind, I think 6 Australian Opens is, I mean, how many people have won 6 majors? 6 Grand Slams. I wonder how many Andre Agassi has won. Maybe he won 8. Actually, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, 6 at one event is pretty impressive. Yeah, Agassi won 8 in total. So, but
It's
that's
pretty
still
impressive, but it's also, sorry, John. It's also impressive that it's his it's not even his best slam, and he's won 6 of them.
Right, exactly. The US Open is
Yeah.
his third best, and he's won 5 of them back to back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, listen, Jamie, I'm going to bring it to a close because I've got to do a show now with Jack on the Davis Cup. We're having Federer week here with just one episode, a one-off episode about the Davis Cup, because obviously there's been a lot of action this week. Listen, it's been great to talk to you. There's nobody I would like to share some of these with than you, Jamie. And obviously you and I go back 14 years. I taught you everything you know about tennis. Of course, we all know that. But seriously, it's been great to have you on board, and I look forward to having you on board again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Pleasure.
Take care and see you, everybody. Take care, everybody. It was great. Thanks for stopping by. Ciao.